Well, good evening, everybody. This is the Philosophy Film Club, and it's our first show. And hopefully, not too many hiccups today on the first one, but we'll bear with it. Great group of people joined, and I'm hoping it's going to be a good show and an interesting topic. We're going to talk about today is Dead Poets Society. Bit of an old film, but actually really, really rich in metaphor. I thought really great film in many ways for us as philosophers. So yeah, I'm going to kind of crack on. I'm going to sort of basically leave it open. I mean, I've got stuff I can talk about the film, but I'm curious what other people had to say about it. If they have something to say. Well, I can just sort of briefly go into some of my thoughts on it. Um, I mean, one of the things about this film, I remember when I watched it years ago, was it was all about sort of teaching, people critical thinking, and in some ways that's what the film was about, but really it wasn't kind of anything to do with it. It was when I watched it this time round, I got a sense that that was that was kind of wasn't really the main crux of the story. The main crux I got from the first was the really really poor parenting, and how and also how it was kind of glossed over. And I mean, obviously there's lots and lots to do with parenting in this particular film. But yeah, it just seemed to me to be very, very glossed over, and I was curious how other people experienced that. You know.
Well, Pat, if if I may, I'm gonna start.
Yeah,
I'm
go
gonna
for it. Yeah. Yeah.
break the ice. I know many people interpret this film thinking that it's humanities versus hard sciences, or maybe even realism versus romanticism. I have to shamefully admit the fact that I've never watched the movie before. I have seen bits and pieces of it, but I watched it for the first time this week, and it impacted me very, very hard. I, the way I see the main message of the movie as being a clash between the old and the new, between parents and children, exactly like you said. And I agree with you that this aspect has been glossed over because I read several reviews online, and it's mostly about parental mental abuse as well as, I assume, physical abuse, although we only see the physical abuse coming from the headmaster. But judging from the kids' behavior around their parents, at least I can assume that there has been some physical abuse going on in the family. So my personal take on the movie is about the fact that it's about the old generation crushing the new one, trying to fit it in a box that is too small for them to fit in. Well, this is the eternal fight of the old to maintain the status quo and stall the evolution against, and this is a fight against the new that always wants to innovate and always wants to find different ways of thinking and different ways of being. So yeah, it was hard to watch, especially since personally I've had huge problems in school, in high school, rejecting authority. And at the end of the movie, I realized that I've never had a teacher that even resembled the character of that Robin Williams was
Right.
portraying. And that was very, very hard to watch because I realized that I always desired a teacher like that.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense to you.
No, it does. One of the things I thought about the whole Robin Williams character was that he almost didn't exist. He was kind of like he was almost like, I mean, I'm being perhaps esoteric in a sense, but I'm just trying to look at the story from a deeper end. It was almost like he wasn't like you said. I'd never had teachers like that. I mean, I guess I had teachers I kind of liked, although I've since subsequently discovered that actually I probably didn't like them. It was just a safety mechanism, but I won't complicate it with that. But his character almost didn't sort of seem to be. It was almost mythical, you know, like he came in and as soon as he came in, he went out after all, you know, with this through this whole story and the parents blaming him and stuff, and it was like blaming their dreams, you know, that sort of. It was almost like he was a catalyst for their dreams, and so therefore he kind of almost. Does that make sense? He didn't kind of exist in that sense. I mean.
Well, I see Robin Williams' character as a plot advancing character, not necessarily as the main character, which I think the main character is Todd Anderson. At least that's how it came across to me. He was the only one that had the biggest evolution and the healthiest evolution of all. He was the one that managed to balance passion and rationality in the end. The other ones kind of got lost in it. The character of Neil Perry got really lost and committed suicide. Knox Overstreet,
Right.
his romantic passion ended up consuming him. Charlie Dalton, he underwent a change of personality, even changing his name to Nwanda. So his passion for rebellion and defiance took over him. The other ones, I'm not sure what kind of passions they had. The two geeks, the Pitts and Meeks, I think their passion is for geeky things, like putting together a radio and stuff like that.
Sure.
And the only character that kind of was dragging along and not really embracing passion, but conforming to these rebels, if I may say, is of course Cameron, the redhead guy.
Right.
And the only one that in my opinion managed to embrace this passion in a healthy way was in the end Todd Anderson.
Yeah. I found all those boys' characters really interesting. They all sort of they all seem to complement each other with their different their different sort of personas. And I had a kind of thought. I watched it again last night, and I mean maybe not everyone's particularly familiar with the Miko system or with IFS or whatever. But when you talk about parts in a person's psyche, you know, and I got this really insightful thought about these boys. They were kind of like almost. At first, I thought perhaps they were reflecting Neil's kind of parts, but then when I actually thought about it, they were kind of reflecting each other's parts, and psychological parts. So you had like you had the very the straight guy wanted to do everything kind of by the book, and then you had the rebellious guy like Nwanda. You know, you had like Todd, who was the shy, introverted, and it was like all these parts competing with each other, but also trying to negotiate with each other as well. I found that really fascinating. I mean, I don't know how that connects for other people, but it was a really interesting piece of insight, I thought, about the whole, those characters in particular, because they were the most interesting characters, I think, in the whole. It wasn't Robin Williams for me who was the interesting character. It was these boys, Sorry, was someone going to jump in?
Well, I would like to complement what you're saying. I thought that the scene where Robin Williams was provoking Todd to do a poem, a live stand-up poem in front of the class, I thought that was very powerful, and it felt for me almost like a therapy session. I follow IFS therapy, and it was pretty similar. Like how different parts of him came up and gave their thoughts, and instead of rejecting them, he let those thoughts out. And I thought that was a very powerful scene. That maybe not necessarily what you're talking about, but I think it supplements the idea that maybe the writers were kind of aware of what they were doing.
Right, right, yeah. Yes, it was. I mean, I don't know if it was if the writers were conscious of this. Maybe. I mean, obviously, I'm putting the metaphor against it myself, but it seemed they were very reliant on each other, and so that was why I kind of got this intense feeling that these are kind of parts, which is like, you know, with ourselves, we have like numerous parts that argue with each other, try and negotiate with each other and stuff like that. And so it just seemed like a most. Sorry, Dara. Go on.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I had a thought, and I kind of wanted to run by you guys. But kind of like what you're saying, it was the personalities that, for me, also was like really gripping. But something that stood out to me, and it might just be like in my head, but the Dead Poet Society, the title itself, it makes me think that they're not talking about the poets that they're quoting, like that have died, literally died. But I think that, like, with the strictness of the parenting, like the terrible parenting and the faculty and whatnot, that they kill, like, the individual poets within these kids. And so what Keating's character does is kind of like bring them back to life. So it's really not about him in the foreground, but it's what he does for them that nobody else has done.
Right, right.
That's a sorry. That actually kind of goes along with something I was thinking about, how how they were kind of killed inside. That near the end, when I forget his name, but the red-haired one who ratted them out.
Cameron, yeah.
Cameron. When they confronted Cameron, I found my own reaction to that for a few minutes was just hating Cameron, because he did this terrible betrayal. But I had to catch myself and think about the environment that this kind of captivity that these kids were in and had been in for most of their lives. And like we don't know Cameron's history. We don't know why he's invested in staying in this school. Like, we don't what his parents have done to him. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, they are in sort of a captivity. I mean, I went to boarding school. I know what it's like, and believe me, it definitely is captivity, night and day. So yeah, he's, you know, obviously just. I think it's very clear that he was protecting himself against a slew of adults that would make his life hell. Of course, you know.
When I talk to Steph about my history, because my history is quite similar to Todd Anderson's. Not that I was going to be an actor or anything, but I definitely had the father who was not really allowing me to make my own choices. He was very demanding, very stressing, and every time that I would come up with a plan of my own, it would be discredited. And Steph called that evicting my own personality and replacing it with like an automaton. And so it's kind of like an exorcism of the self, and just putting something else in there. And that's what I kind of see happening in that particular scene. Like the personality that was there was evicted and just replaced by this drone that has to answer.
Right. What did people make of Todd? I think it's Ethan Hawke is the actor, but what did people make of Todd at all? Did anyone have any thoughts on him?
Well, can you guys hear me?
We can, Dave. Yeah. Go for it.
So sorry. So if you look at the characters, the students, as the way somebody earlier in the conversation described them as various aspects of the ecosystem, each one of them, with the exception of the two characters who there was someone, and I'm sorry I can't remember the character's name, but very early on in the film it's revealed that everything comes fairly easy to him. He's the one who coaches everyone in Latin, and I think Trig also. He had glasses and had a very laissez-faire attitude about his studies because he was basically a brilliant student. But all the other students don't want to be there. And I think the outside influence of Robin Williams' character coming into that static interplay, like if Robin Williams hadn't shown up and been the teacher that year, I think everything would have gone pretty much fairly boringly that entire school year. Nothing interesting would have happened. But he comes in and sets the movie's plot in motion with that external force by showing them independent, critical thought, expressing themselves as artists, not trusting authority or even ridiculing it, and getting them in touch with themselves or those parts of themselves that have been inundated by their parents' visions of what they should do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. You're right, and that's probably given my overly critical view of Robin, or not feeling he was particularly present. You're right, he was particularly present in that, in galvanizing them into rethinking and stuff. And
well, I liked I'm sorry, is it Addie or Allie? I liked her observation that he was more of less of a three-dimensional character and more of a driving force to set it in motion. And I also think it's interesting that of all the choices to give that character's history, he himself is an alum of that school. I thought that was quite interesting, Robin Williams' character.
Yeah, he'd been to the school, hadn't he? And yeah.
That idea of him, or the fact, sorry, not idea, that he was an alum also kind of goes along with makes him goes into his like outside force persona, because the boys can see part of themselves in him. They have that instant connection, and so he's if he's able to be expressive and start the Dead Poet Society and everything like that, why not them?
There's a very touching scene where they're crossing a common area, the students, with the old yearbook that they found Robin Williams' student picture in, and they call out to him by his name, and he refuses to respond, but then they say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," and he turns around. And I thought it was very interesting that he takes the book, he turns around, and it's not him against that. It's not a conversation, him across from the group of boys, but he turns around with the book so that he's facing the same way as the students, and he kneels to look at his student photo in the list of activities. To me, that I think I've probably seen this film 15 times over the years. I think it's probably one of the 10 best films I've ever seen. And there are little nuances like that that really make me stop and think. He's aligning himself physically with the boys. He crouches down to make himself, like going back in time, to when he was younger and smaller. I just thought it was a very poetic moment.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he, like you say, he kneeled down with them and he's their size, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, he really connected with what they were connecting with, this picture and his history and the poetry, and I think that's where they found out that he was the Dead Poets. That's where they'd found out whether he had this Dead Poets Society, right? I believe. It's the moment when they discovered that and they wanted to then create their own society in that way. Yeah.
And he actually does that too in the scene where he invites Todd to do the poem. The moment that Todd is flying on his own, he actually sits back and kneels with the rest of the students.
Right.
I think that's a really good observation.
Todd, for me, was I don't know. I found him a really interesting character, but only at the beginning and at the end, you know. And I think Todd was somebody that came out at that. He was like the one who was constantly warning Neil about his father and about his parents and stuff. And there was this sense that quite sort of. I remember this quite a sort of emotional scene when he finds out that Neil's died and stuff, and he runs off, sort of thing. And it's almost like it was almost like he sort of recognized that he felt he was essentially his protector, or I think that that's kind of what his character assumed, and I think he at that moment realized that he had no kind of way of protecting him, and so obviously the father, he blamed his father, Neil's father, of course, in that moment.
Well, regarding that scene, actually, what I noticed is that when Todd finds out, he's the only one that openly places moral responsibility where it belongs. He's the only one that comes out and says it was his father. It was his father. Neil wouldn't have never done something like that.
Well, when watching the movie, unless I'm wrong, it seemed that none of the other boys really understood the relationship that he had with his father except for Todd. Todd was the one who really, all the rest of the boys saw him with that cheery, happy, ready for life, but he saw the fear that in his eyes whenever he would speak of his father, not allowing him to, act and whatnot. They saw him getting the role and being excited about that, but I think maybe maybe I'd have to watch it again. Maybe he's the only one who really understood the fear that he had of his father.
Yeah, but I think that was partly because he shared the same fear with his own father. I think if you remember I think the very first scene where they're joining the school and stuff. I think his father's again putting the same kind of pressure on him like Neil's father does, but of course it's a very sort of and he's very anxious because when he goes into the office at the very end, you see the anxiety on his face when he sees his parents there, which you get the impression he wasn't expecting them to be there. And I remember a time at school having a very similar experience where my parents suddenly appeared in the headmaster's office, and I thought I was in trouble and all sorts of things. So I could really resonate with me, that feeling that he had. So I think he kind of shared Neil's experience of his family. Plus they were roommates, of course, so they would have known each other better, I guess.
I think to add to that point, Pat, about Neil and Todd having similar upbringings, even if we really didn't get to see very much of Todd's, was earlier on when Neil was all excited about auditioning or going to be in the play. Todd was kind of questioning him or discouraging him, saying, "What's your father gonna think?"
No, yeah, quite. I remember that was his protector thing. What's your father going to say? And you sure you want to do that? And Neil got kind of angry with him, didn't he? As I recall. But yeah. I thought that was I thought his character, although it wasn't stupendously, there wasn't lots to it. It was very, very. And it was an interesting character, and
I thought that scene was very interesting. I actually wrote it down because I wanted to mention it earlier too. I interpreted that scene first as this Todd, raining on Neil's parade. Like Neil is so happy, and he's finally doing what he wants to do, and there's this other guy who's just constantly seeding doubts into him. So I kind of interpreted that as Neil growing and Todd being held back. But I kind of lost empathy in that moment because these guys are 15, 16 years old or something. It's not safe for them to do what what they were doing. And of course, the Neil character ends up taking his own life because of those events. And so in retrospect, I was completely wrong about that scene as I was watching it, and I thought it was a very interesting moment for myself personally to remember this moment of empathy instead of just he's holding him back.
Right.
It was kind of like his IFS. It was perhaps Todd's dad coming out in him that actually would have ended up protecting Neil if he would have listened.
Yeah, because Todd would probably experience that surge of anxiety when he sees Neil go against his father's wishes. He would have a similar reaction to whether he would do that himself. So I think you're spot on there.
And one of the things that made me even more curious about Todd's background was the way his spontaneous poem in the class ended up. I forget the exact details, but it was about some like crazy old man. If anyone else remembers more clearly than I do, then feel free to interrupt me. But it was something about a crazy old man, maybe like suffocation, and just something very dark that.
Well, it started out as being just about a crazy old man, but then I think it very quickly transformed into being about a metaphor involving a blanket and something else, and I'm not really sure what.
I have the poem here. Shall I read it?
Yes.
So it's I close my eyes and this image floats beside me. The sweaty-toothed madman with the stare that pounds my brains. His hands reach out and choke me, and all the time he's mumbling. Truth, like a blanket that always leaves your feet cold. You push it, stretch it, it will never be enough. Kick it, beat it, it will never cover any of us. From the moment we enter crying to the moment we leave dying, it will just cover your face as you wail and cry and scream. A link in the chat.
Yeah. Thanks, Pim.
That seems like a direct metaphor for his dad to me.
Well, I actually, this poem, I think it's the core of the movie. I think it's the most important scene in the movie, and the movie kind of gravitates around it, in my opinion, at least. And it really made an impact on me. So I went and I Googled several critiques and interpretations of this poem to see what other people had to say about it. I mean, after all, it's a movie about poetry and about expressing our passions through poems. And the reviews that I read were talking about the blanket being passion, and not covering the feet, meaning that the feet symbolizing rationalism, and certain people said that the head symbolizes romanticism, which I don't know how that can ever be. So the takes that I read on this poem were about, again, romanticism versus rationalism, but this is not a surprise to me, because the fact that nobody wants to address the parental abuse is not news. But my own take on this poem is that the sweaty-toothed madman is the father. Now, when he says, of course, I close my eyes and this image floats beside me, that's his father, the figure of his father, always watching him and always correcting him and always oppressing him, if I can say so. A sweaty tooth, like, you know, how parents scream at us, how parents always verbally abuse us. Sweaty tooth means somebody that, to me at least, it means somebody that is very verbally abusive to the point that he just spits out when he speaks, with a stare that pounds my brain, pretty much the mental control, and his hands reach out and choke me. That's that's pretty much choking his true self. And then he goes on and he says all the time he's mumbling truth. Now, he's definitely not talking about actual truth here, because truth is never mumbled. Truth is always presented with certainty. When somebody says he's mumbling truth, you can pretty much imagine that's not quite truth. It's his father's truth, his father's own image of him. So truth like a blanket that covers him. The blanket is the image that his father wants to project upon him. So the false self that the father wants Todd to fully embrace. But the false self, as we all know, it can never be enough. It can never cover all of us. So and then the false self is laid like a blanket on Todd, and then he goes, you kick at it, you push at it, you stretch it, you beat it, and this is obvious child abuse, because he's under the blanket while he's being abused, under the blanket of false self. So and in the end he ends, it will just cover your face as you wail and cry and scream. Now, face covered, this is a mask, and again it points to a false self that is imposed by his father. So living under the blanket of false self, the parents' expectations of him is excruciatingly painful. So the poem is pretty much his struggle against, and how painful it is to embrace this false self that his parents project upon him.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think it's makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
I think the one thing can be added to that, which is in saying that a father figure is spouting truth that isn't truth, you could also see it that it really is truth, in that the father, one or two fathers as they're portrayed in the film, are kind of portrayed as, follow the life I'm telling you to follow, or else you'll be in pain. And the truth, the problematic truth in that is that it is true, because in that society, it's not acceptable to say, you can't go around and say, well, my father was going to pay for me to go to medical school and I rejected it, because then everyone will say, oh, well, your father was trying to be good to you, and it's that we're told to listen to our parents and be obedient to our parents and to forgive our parents. And that's what happens to Neil, is that no one tells him to obey his father to survive. Or, no one says, it's, you need to obey your father so that he won't yell at you. Or no one says you need to disobey your father because all he can do is yell at you. No one gives him the whole truth, and so the result is that he feels trapped. No one at any time did anyone say to Neil, hey man, you've got a couple more years and then you're done. You can just say goodbye to your dad. You don't have to see him ever again in your life. And that's the truth that I think that's part of the truth, at least I think, that was so damaging, was that in the society they lived in, there's no escape, because they can't just, no one's telling them, hey, you can just leave at some point, survive now. You can avoid being an actor now. Wait a year or two. And that's really all that had to happen. All Neil had to do was wait a year or two. But no one told him that. No one gave him that truth, because that truth didn't exist.
Actually, in the conversation that he has with Mr. Keating, with Robin Williams' character, Robin Williams tells him, he says, just drag it on for a couple of years and then you're going to be out of school and you can do whatever you want. I don't know if you guys remember that scene.
But I do remember.
And he says, no, that's not possible. That's not how it works. So
but
he
I think,
does address it. And
I don't think he actually talked to his father. I'm pretty sure we're supposed to understand, and maybe I'm wrong, that he didn't actually talk to his father. He's saying, well, I talked to my father, having not talked to him, and he was very angry. But nothing he said was consistent with the way his father felt. And I think he was just kind of creating this false reality for himself, and that's why he wasn't willing. He wasn't being truthful with his father, and he wasn't being truthful with himself, and he wasn't being truthful with Mr. Keating. I think he was avoiding that conversation still.
I would have to disagree on that one, because I think the whole movie is about you have to be untruthful to your parents in order to be truthful to yourself. So it's that duality. It's that choice. You cannot be truthful to your parents and preserve your true self. The whole movie is about free thinking, individuality, and passion versus indoctrination, conformity, and the crushing of feelings. So pretty much, in a nutshell, the true self versus false self.
Do you think
So-
that he did? Do you think the character did actually have the conversation with his father, though? That's what I'm not sure about.
Well, his father did show up, so that means that they did speak on the phone or whatever. I think they spoke on the phone. So his father did show up, and he never, after the show, he never really confronted his son about, hey, why did you go there? It seems like he knew he was going to go on with the show. So I think he did tell his father, and his father said, okay, get this done, and then we'll see each other after the show, and then this will stop. But the thing is the destruction of the true self on the altar of sacrificial altar that the parents demand.
Yeah, that's the overriding feeling that I got, that it was a real destruction of the true self. The idea of I mean, passion. It was sort of maybe the passion thing was over. Was the sort of was over dramatized in some senses, but was the true self, and there was this kind of there was this really interesting scene at the beginning where they do the school some kind of school saying or something, where they say, I can't remember what it was now.
It's the four pillars.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Travesty. No, that's the what was it?
Tradition,
honor, discipline, and excellence. And then they go back to the room, and there's this duality between how they act in front of adults and how they act when they're alone. Is the true self again versus the false self. And on the false self is embraces the saying tradition, honor, and discipline and excellence, and the true self, when they get alone in the room, it's travesty, horror, decadence, and excrement.
Yeah.
And in
I'm
fact,
glad you remember them, because
Robin Williams uses the word excrement when he talks about this PhD guy that is trying to teach them about poetry.
Right. I'm glad you remember that, because I couldn't remember those say. But yeah, that was very poignant, I thought, and typified the sort of true self, false self thing. And in school, in that kind of school environment, it is all about false self. It's all about honor and duty and discipline, and of course, because that was all about them getting them to conform.
I don't mean to go back to the poem, but I also I saw everything that Addie saw. The only thing that I saw that I thought that was a little bit different is the metaphor with the blanket. Whenever I originally reread it, I thought of like how a blanket for a child is supposed to be like a security blanket, and how fatherhood is supposed to be support and love and basically help to the child. And so instead of being those things that keeps you warm, he just uses it to suffocate him. Like, it just goes over his face. And like, the more they try to rebel, like kick at it, beat it, the more suffocating it becomes. Because like when he tried to rebel against his father, or when Neil did, like, he came down even harder. That's just a thought. I don't know.
Yeah, I think what you could say is one of the fears that Neil had was he had never stood up for himself at all. And so he may have been afraid to find out, if he stood up for himself, how rigid was his father going to end up being. And it turned out that when he did finally try to sort of stand up for himself, the first thing his father does is start the process of sending him to military school. which is pretty horrific.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate suffocating, like most suffocating thing he could do.
Yeah, that was an horrific. That sort of was the last nail in the coffin, I think, for Neil in that sense. It was pretty, yeah. It was bad enough where he already was, and then he was going to be sent to military school. Was it for 10 years or something? And so, yeah, it was a prison sentence, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was odd. An odd thing about the film is the way that we actually see males portrayed as having emotions, as having connections and bonds with other people without the the necessary females to be present. The emotions aren't brought out by females as the way it's normally portrayed in our societies and cultures, where it's sort of, well, men are emotionless and women are able to pull the emotions out. The men are emotional. We see it in the very, very beginning of the film. They all have passions and whatnot. And I thought that was kind of interesting thing that the film does is show that these relatively young teen or mid-teens, whatever they are, they have passions, and we don't see them conflicting. We don't see any. The only male-to-male violence or aggression or disagreement we really see is between the football player and the one character whose name I can't remember.
Knox, I think, is it?
Yeah, and it's so normal for a movie placed in that setting to just show boys. It's just, we just want to fight each other and we just want to hurt each other. And throughout most of the film, they're to some degree at least helping each other.
Yeah, no, I got that sense throughout. Tailing back to the women issue, wasn't it interesting how they're in that cave, and beforehand they've been doing all this drumming stuff, and Rwanda came out with this amazing piece of soliloquy or whatever regarding this nude picture of this lady or whatever, and but yet when he brought women into the scene, they all went sort of deathly silent. And I always remember they sort of like didn't have apart from Rwanda, of course, who'd invited them and was just in this kind of rebellious, kind of passionate Byron-esque type of phase, The other guys were kind of really, they were muted in a sense, when they were around the girls,
Well, when it comes to women, what I wanted to point out is when Knox Overstreet comes back from dinner. And he tells the guys, "I've met the most beautiful girl in the world," but she's dating this jerk, And then Pitts goes, "All the good ones go for the jerks," and that really reflects the woman's worth in, at least in that society back then, and to a certain extent in our society. And this is, in my opinion, by women's own choosing. Is in beauty, because they don't know anything about this girl. They don't know her virtues. They have no idea about her moral character, and still they consider her a good one because she's the most beautiful girl in the world. And of course, the most beautiful girl in the world, as we all know, have very little moral substance and end up going for the alpha male, the jerk. But the way that they view a good woman as being just beautiful, they never inquired about the other qualities of this woman, and they labeled her as a good one.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, right. I think that's probably a very good point. They were sort of besotted by her beauty, and probably besotted by these other girls' beauty, right? And if beauty is something of value, and you don't possess that, perhaps, or you don't feel you possess that as a man or as a boy or whatever, then yeah, it's gonna keep you silent, probably,
Yeah, I found that whole pursuit, I guess you could call it, of that girl to be like the entire thing was just kind of underscored by that fact that he didn't really know her, and she even told him that when she came to the school, that he didn't really know her, but he just kind of kept going, and that was his whole thing throughout the movie. That was his storyline. It was this romantic pursuit, and it would have been interesting to be able to see more closure on that, or how it eventually turned out. Like, would this ends up being a mistake that he learns from? Is it a disaster? Or does he lose interest? I wasn't really sure what to make out of that entire storyline.
You know, I agree with you. It was kind of almost seemed like irrelevant. It seemed like it wasn't. It was kind of fun, I guess, and I guess you could hook it in with the whole expressing yourself, and you know, they were, you know, it was a kind of challenge, and he went for the challenge and stuff like that. But you're right, in many ways, it didn't come away with a lot of substance, you know.
I think they just used it as that. It's the most cliche, typical, you know, seize the day kind of action is, you know, boys are scared to death to talk to girls, and he says, screw it, I'm going for it. And that's just, and I don't think it's meant to be anything negative. It's just sort of, maybe they just felt like they need to have that in the story, that, you know, hey, there's a pretty girl, I want to talk to her. Normally he wouldn't talk to her, but because of what he's learned through Mr. Keating, he wants to go for it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That there doesn't really need to be resolution necessarily. It's just he's stepping out. He's learning to express himself.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, Nathan. Yeah. It was
And I think
sorry.
Yeah, I think in the end of the movie, at least towards the end at the play, I think they're trying to imply that with him and with her going to the play, and him kind of saying, you know, your boyfriend would never go to a play with you and he wouldn't enjoy it. Whatever the wording was, they're kind of implying that they do share that in common, that she must have some sort of passion if she wants to go see a play, and then has this guy who wants to go with her. And it wasn't just he wants to do it to be nice to her, is he seemed to genuinely want to enjoy going to a play specifically with her.
Yeah. Yeah, so was there any, I mean, I was trying to think of another particular character that I enjoyed in that was is it Rwanda? I'm getting it right. It was they're taking it from some poem. I can't remember the name he was taking. Rwanda, isn't it? But what I mean, he was the rich kid. But what did you think about his sudden? He kind of, I guess he was always a little bit on the wild side, but he really took to the Dead Poets Society. He was almost like the kind of leader or the most the loudest part. But it just seemed like he suddenly he went from being slightly gregarious to being kind of a little bit bonkers. You know what I mean by bonkers? It's an English word, but he kind of went a bit sort of he kind of went on a little bit on the crazy side.
He's almost like the Adam Kokesh of the film, where he's the guy who, you know, he thinks things are wrong, so he goes to Washington D.C. and, you know, pumps a shotgun in public and says, "Hey, I'm here, and you're going to listen to me."
Yeah.
Well, he's the one that always does the civil disobedience, you know, openly, and he's the rebel of the group. I mean, even in the first scene that he appears, he's the first one to pull out the cigarette. He is always has this attitude of I don't care about anything. I'm just going to be as defiant as I can. So yeah, I love your analogy with your comparison with Adam Kokesh. I think that's pretty good.
and maybe it was brought up before I got into the call, but it's important to recognize that he was literally tortured in one scene and questioned. I mean, paddling, we're kind of trained to see it as it's a bit brutal way of spanking, but I mean, we see spanking as brutal. So, I mean, getting hit on the bottom with a piece of wood with holes in it and then questioned during that was, that's torture.
Well, that scene was also very sexual in nature, in my opinion. This old and nasty pedophile spanking the bottom of a young man sitting on his desk, practically doggy style.
Yeah, and it seemed that the man doing it was disappointed when he did not cry out.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the sadist attitude that takes pleasure in other people's suffering, but it was very, very sexual in nature, especially when they closed in on the headmaster's face. That expression of repressed sexual pleasure that at least I read on his face.
Yeah, I could see that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely a sort of disappointment that he wasn't getting the pain or the expression of pain that he was hoping for. Yeah. Which is kind of interesting because more personal story. I'm probably around the same sort of age. I had been caned at school, and the very last time they threatened me with it, I decided not to comply with their wishes. And it's interesting because rather than try and force me, they just gave up. And which, looking back, is an interesting thing. Like you say, the sadist only likes it when he gets people to comply, and he doesn't have to embarrass himself with stuff like force and stuff like that. So yeah.
What I also found interesting in the movie was when the professor came to talk to him after he got paddled and explained to him the difference between carpe diem, seizing the day, and simply like the YOLO kind of ideology of like taking all the risks and not accounting for the benefits of those risks. Do you guys understand what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he said sucking the marrow out of life doesn't mean choking on the bone.
Yeah, exactly.
So what he realizes that this passion has gone a little bit too far, so he's trying to teach them how to balance being grounded and being very passionate, to not overdo it.
I was in the FDR European call about an hour or before this one, and they were talking about love and respect, and they said that what was it? He had said that love without respect is like a car without wheels, and I said that I said I wanted to change his analogy, and I said it's more love without respect is like a car with no steering wheel and the gas is pressed all the way down. And I think in the same way with passion is you can have passion, but there's a certain point where you need to recognize when your passion is more self-soothing, as I think it was for the character. It was his way of expressing himself, but not in a healthy way. It was more of just lashing out, and not in a violent way, but in just inviting. Like, the only way that he knows he's living is if he's living so hard that people are literally attacking him.
Right.
It raises questions about his history again, because if he's seeking out the punishment, maybe he needs that negative attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, because it really troubles me, and I'm sorry about this, but I don't think love can ever exist without respect. If love is our involuntary response to virtue, then if you love somebody but don't respect him, I think you should redefine the term, because that's not really love.
Well, Steph usually defines it. He'll correct himself and he'll say that a virtuous person experiences love as an involuntary response to virtue, but he also says that someone who is not virtuous will feel a lot of the same feelings from someone who is also not virtuous. And I'm not saying that's exactly what it is. I'm just saying he usually says it that way. He'll say that a virtuous person will feel love from someone who is also virtuous and feels it involuntarily.
Yeah, it's the involuntary response to somebody else's virtue. I mean, how can you love somebody that you look down on?
If you look down on yourself, then you might feel that way.
Yeah, if you look down on yourself,
you should be able to recognize.
Then you look up on others. But if you despise a person, you cannot love that person. I mean, it's a huge contradiction, and it's pretty much what happens to our so-called feelings for our parents. We think it's love, but it's not quite it.
Yeah. I was going to go to the main crux of this film, which is the Carpe Diem saying that was, it seems to be, at least for me, when I watched it all those years ago, seemed to be the main thrust of the film, and it was the kind of feel-good factor of the film. And one thing that I experienced in this whole with this movie, though, towards the end, and was the sense that, seizing the day doesn't seem to get you anywhere. It just seems to get you into all kinds of trouble and conformity, which was proved, I think, pretty much proved at the end that conformity was the only way. And yeah, there was the little rebellious part where they got on the desk, of course, and said goodbye to the captain. But I felt very resolutely that the main crux of the film, or the main sort of Carpe Diem, was kind of lost at that point. Did anyone else experience that or feel that?
I think to a small extent, in the not really that small, but in the fact that nothing really changed. Like, most of them were still going to the school, and Keating got fired, so maybe things got even a little worse. But throughout the film, throughout each of their individual journeys, they just all had a much richer experience than they would have otherwise, and will continue to just as they go throughout their life, and like we've been talking about before, as they separate further from their parents, then they'll retain that experience, and it will get better. They will have the journey. It was the main focus of the film.
Right. I don't get that sense at all. I must admit, I got a sense of conformity at the end, and that, yeah, I mean, sure, they might learn some aspects of it, but I think they learned that conformity was the most expedient in the moment.
If you go back and you watch that scene, and you'll notice that half the students, and maybe more than half the students, actually, I think I'm a little wrong. I think a little less than half the students don't actually stand. They actually are still sitting in the desk with their heads down. And if you consider a rebellion in which only a certain portion of the people are rebelling, they're going to get punished. And I think these kids, all having been a part of this club, once more rebelling again, I think is going to get them all expelled, as it did, because they said that the one character did get expelled. So I think it's definitely possible that they are not going to the school anymore afterwards because of what they did in that classroom.
Sure. Yeah.
And then maybe that ends up being the best thing that could have happened to them.
Well, isn't that what happens when you try to bring free thinking to people? Not everybody will embrace it. And actually, I think the people that stood up on the desks, the number of them is a little bit too high, comparing to my experience of bringing individuality and free thought to to other people. Very few of them respond, but the movie ends with the fact that Robin Williams leaves the school with a certainty that he did manage to plant the seed of disobedience, of individuality, and of free thinking in at least a few of them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it necessarily was a dead loss in that sense, but yeah, I just got the sense that the original thing it kind of got lost at the end.
It kind of reminds me of something Steph said the other day about like, why would you try to basically convince me that they should get a parking ticket when I've already convicted them of murder? So it's like it gets heavier than just the carpe diem. Like, they find that when they try to do this, it literally cost a kid his life. So I think the theme is still there, but they realize like how dangerous it is in their current environment.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I got a very palpable sense of fear from them. That's why they all kind of caved in at the end to sign that document against Keating and stuff.
Yeah.
But I actually feel worse for the people who stayed sitting down and weren't expelled than the people who sat up on the desks and rebelled, because they're the ones who are like broken, who lost. I mean, most of them still do like Mr. Keating, but they've kind of lost their integrity, and they're too scared to fight for what they believe in anymore. And it's like the ones who stood up on the desk, they're the ones who are still alive. You understand what I mean? They're the ones who still have their identity, and they're not completely destroyed by the school, the environment of obedience.
Right.
I'm not sure I would agree with that in that way, because like I know I get a feeling like like Robin Williams' character, he evoked their passion, but he didn't give them like any tools or like tell them like, look, you're in a situation where it's dangerous and stuff, and like so do it a bit hidden. So they're like really more reckless, I think, than the other ones might be a bit more sensible. I don't know. Like it's a bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say maybe it's like too much of a lack of empathy, but I kind of felt disdain for those still sitting, just because I thought they were gonna turn into like the teachers and the headmasters that are so oppressive. Like, I just thought those were the future, those guys. So I felt like disdainful toward them.
Right. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of. I think there's a certain amount of ambiguity at the ending, and I think yeah, like Robin says, you know, there wasn't really much. I mean, although I suppose you could argue that Mr. Keating said the bit about not eating the bone. I think Ailey just said it better than I did, because I can't remember the line. So there was a sort of a warning, but yeah, not much of a warning, just a sort of you know. So I do wonder how much those children really understood the risks attached to what they were actually doing, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, Keating himself is a bit like reckless in his like way of presenting things, like tearing pages out and doing random things, standing on desks and stuff. So I mean, he's not like a good example of being like reasonably passionate, like in a way. I mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, when he tells people the kids to tear the pages from the book, one of the things he says, you know, when the kids are reluctant to do it, he says, "Go on. It's not like it's not the Bible. It's like you're not gonna go to hell for this," which pretty much showed me the extreme indoctrination that they were receiving in that school. I mean, the kids viewed that manual as almost as holy as the Bible, and they couldn't tear it apart. And then he goes on, he says, like, this is like a battle, a war, and the casualties could be your hearts and souls. And the confrontation and the battle, it's throughout the whole movie between the children and the teachers and the parents on the other side. And in fact, even Neil says to Todd in one scene when Todd is trying to ground him, he says, "Jesus, Todd, like whose side are you on?" You know, so there are sides, but in the end, this battle for their hearts and their souls is won by at least a part of the people in that class. So they're not going to stand down. They're not going to obey. They're going to express their true selves as much as possible, and they won the battle. Not the whole class, but at least part of it. So he leaves the school. Keating leaves the school, knowing that at least he got to save a few of them. If that makes sense to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's quite poignant that it was Todd that stood on the desk at first, given that Todd was the shyest, the most reserved, didn't want to say boo to a goose, that kind of thing. You know, he was pretty reserved. So it was quite poignant that he was the one that instigated that stand-up. It was like he had an epiphany of some sort, you know.
And you can see in his face in the room when he's with his parents, you can see in his face how badly he wants to say to them and to the headmaster or whoever that was, what he said to the other boys out in the snow when he said that it was his father. He wanted to say something, wanted to express himself, but he was just, you know, too afraid. And then you see it on his face again when Mr. Keating comes in the room. Then finally he breaks through it and gets on the desk.
Yeah.
That reminded me of the phrase, silence is violence. And it seemed to me that that's sort of what Todd learned throughout the course of the piece, is that through his silence and through his emotional distancing from situations, that it was not only hurting him, but also, you know, that type of thing, how it can impact others in a societal sense.
Right. Okay, I have run out of notes now, so we're freewheeling.
Oh well, I have quite a lot more to say.
Go for it, Eddie.
As usual. Well, another thing that impacted me while watching the movie was how children and young adults, which I think these guys were treated like a subspecies of the human race. You know, like in the scene where Keating is talking to the other professor, and he says, the professor says, free thinkers and 17? Come on, I mean, they can't think. You know, these children are just these walking bags of meat, and we just have to shape them into the thinkers that we want them to become, you know. And then he says, I'm a realist. So this is like reality for him, that children don't have any mental capacities. And then there's another scene with Keating and the headmaster when he asks about what did you do in the courtyard. That was really weird. And he says, well, and he doesn't even, and this is what was weird to me, he went to that school, so he should know views of the people running that school, and still he's very excited telling the headmaster that, hey, I was doing an exercise about the dangers of conformity.
Right.
You know, then he goes like, the idea of education, I think it was to learn to think for yourself. And then the headmaster goes, at this age, at this boy's age, I mean, not on your life. Right. Tradition and discipline. So again, children cannot think. Children are not really human.
Right.
And as we all know, I don't know if you guys are aware of the Flynn effect, which is they measured the IQ, and it seems like with every generation IQ increases. Yeah. So children actually are smarter than adults, and this is how human species evolves. And it's this huge contradiction of adults seeing children as deficient, mentally deficient, instead of seeing them as actually smarter than they are.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I was going back to the Robin Williams thing. Yeah, it was a sort of, I don't know, you wouldn't necessarily use the word cognitive dissonance on his part, but to not really be conscious of what he was saying, having been to the school and probably like been to the school 20 years earlier, right? So it would have been even more conformity, I'd imagine. Yeah, sort of like, how did he not know that? How did he not know how to frame that? Frame his answer in such a way that would have been more, I don't know, congruent with the school's philosophy, I guess.
It's almost like he as a person was more like Charlie or Nawanda, in that he kind of knew what he was getting into teaching free thinking at this school, but he just, something in him just had to do it anyway.
Yeah, I had a thought then, and it's just literally lost me. But yeah, right, totally. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was going to go back to what I said earlier. Almost like Robin Williams was a kind of. I said very at the beginning of the call how I didn't sometimes. It was almost like he wasn't present at times. He was almost like a kind of. He was like some sort of guardian angel to these boys, and it was sort of in that moment, I guess, it's part of what I considered him to be not really there, you know, and not physically there, I mean, in a sense. And like, I mean, I'm talking artistically here, of course, I mean, you know, in the sense that he was a character that of the imagination. Because, yeah, like Adi said, it seemed like there was that disconnect between reality and Mr. Keating's kind of passion, etc. You know, and also why would such a passionate teacher want to go to a school that was so, you know, so kind of so conformist, you know?
Maybe he had like a passion to help, like himself. So whenever he was a kid, maybe he really wanted someone like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, darling. But it still doesn't. I mean, you know, it still doesn't. I don't know. I mean, if I'm passionate about something, I don't know if I want to particularly throw my passion into a place where where that passion's going to be it's going to be stultified, you know, or whatever.
Well, I mean, that's kind of like if you consider that a failure, though, because it can still be argued that it was a success, at least for 1 year.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a failure. I'm just questioning. I'm questioning his motives as a character. You know.
Well, what good is to have passion if you are not able to spread it? So I think, at least the way I interpret it, his motives for coming back to the school and teaching there, and in fact, this is very little mentioned when there's the picture of this woman on his desk, and he says she's in London, and Neil asks him, then why are you here? And he says, because I love teaching. And his passion is actually bringing individuality and bringing the true self out of these kids, because what he did, he went to the school and he managed to survive it, and he managed to preserve his true self. So he comes back to save a few more.
Yeah, you certainly could see it like that, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, it does seem to you know, just on an aside, I just think, you know, in the real world of I don't know, I'm not sure, I wonder, in the real world, would people really do that?
Well, I think it's kind of a natural inclination to want to save your own. So like that's a community that he was brought up, even though it was terrible, like that maybe those are the first ones he wants to try to help.
Yeah. I guess I just question it on the basis that I mean, if I was in love with teaching, I wouldn't be going to some strict boarding school to go and teach. But I know that's the story, and I understand the kind of, but I'm just, questioning the veracity really in that regard. It just doesn't seem like.
It would going from that angle. It would be interesting to kind of like think about the movie in terms of like Fight Club or something. Sorry, spoiler alert. But like where Robin Williams is like someone's alternate personality, or he's not real, and then like watch the movie again with that in mind and see if things make sense. Like, I'm not saying that's the intention of the movie, but it might be an interesting exercise to kind of explicitly think of him as not being real, and then watching the movie.
Yeah, I think that's how I did experience Robin Williams. He was like a kind of unreal character. But yeah, I think his character was an excellent character. It was a great character, and in that regard, yeah, that sort of makes more sense to my earlier thoughts about him not being particularly real, but being a sort of an imagination for these children, and for these boys, etc. And he kind of, like as I said, a kind of guardian angel in an artistic sort of way. You could see that. I'm just, in the real sense I wonder whether a teacher like that would really shared those kind of passions would really go. But you're right, in the artistic sense, I think I could certainly see him as a kind of imaginary character. Yeah. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, at the end, I thought the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, this is a science fiction movie. I mean, fiction movie. I mean, a character like that, I don't think, as far as I know, never existed, and it wouldn't have lasted that long in a school like that. I was surprised that they didn't stop him as soon as he started to rip pages off and making them march and playing music while they were kicking the balls in the yard. I was like, oh my God! In a few moments, somebody's going to come and he's going to fire him. But that didn't happen until the end. Right. So yeah, it's a very fictional character. Never heard of a teacher quite like that.
Didn't Steph in The Truth About Robin Williams say that Robin Williams actually had a teacher like that he based it on a bit? Like in some like university level or so, where he supposedly had a teacher actually also did kind of crazy stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, he may well have done. I certainly hear lots. I certainly hear people talk lax, or have heard people wax lyrical about certain teachers they had. I certainly did it myself, but I found out through therapy that actually they were complete arseholes. So I was wrong, clearly. So I'm always a bit dubious about people's amazing teachers these days. But that's anecdotal on my part, of course.
Well, one teacher came to mind when I saw Robin Williams' character, and not that it's even close. He was even close to Robin Williams. You know how he enters the classroom for the first time, whistling, and just goes out the door, and he says, "Well, come on, what are you doing sitting there?" So he captures their attention by acting differently, and he takes them outside. He cracks jokes, not those stuffy professor that the Latin professor, for example, how he makes them repeat. And I remembered one of my teachers was the physics teacher, and he captured my attention just because he walked in the classroom and sat on his desk instead of sitting in the chair, and he sat on top of his desk, and I was like, wow, this guy is cool. he didn't really do much for my free thinking, but just because he acted a little bit differently, he captured my attention immediately, and I felt somehow connected with him because he was different. And it really intrigued me to see how he approached the class. The Keating's character approached the class by just whistling and walking through the rows of desks, and how these kids were all of a sudden intrigued and curious about what this guy had to say. Any thoughts?
Something that I thought about was, being that Mr. Keating came from that school, would he have been one of the boys who didn't get up on the chair? Like he may have lived to some degree, but he wouldn't have actually stood up on the chair at the end of the film. And then when he went away to pursue his career, he maybe discovered himself more, and wanted to go back and see if he could, help someone. That's that sort of, why did he go back in, unless he felt like there was something that he needed to go back for, something he needed to correct from his time there.
Right.
If that makes sense.
That's an interesting perspective. That kind of humanizes him more, thinking of it that way, from the kind of outside character that he was through the events in the movie.
I actually had a friend in high school, and she became a teacher, and she actually went back and worked for like the worst school. It was like the only school that was worse than ours, like the epitome of like the seedy underbelly of the country, like messed out, like quote unquote white trash type area. And I know, like, I don't think any of us would really consider her to be extremely self-aware or anything like that, but for her kids, like, she'll talk to them about like their hopes and dreams, like they're important. And I think she may be somewhat of that character for them. And I think she kind of gets, like, the reason I was saying that earlier about we have a tendency to help our own, I think she gets some kind of enjoyment out of being able to go back and help those kids, and feeling, maybe it's just like even feeling important, like she's really doing something with those kids.
Right. Yeah, I certainly think some teachers do go into the profession with that kind of thought in mind, I think. Yeah, I just think the system doesn't work in that particular way, generally. So, I don't know, does anybody else have anything they really wanted to sort of point to talk about on this, or?
Well, another thing that really got to me was the end of the play, where Neil looks at his father, and he goes, if we and I'm reading, I'm not. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended. Now, if we shadows, there's again the false self, and he pretty much tells his father through this conclusion of the play. Now, if me as a shadow, I've offended you by expressing my true self, please forgive me, and don't get upset with me. Forgive me, and I'm nothing but an honest puck, So I finally expressed myself.
Right.
And if I'm lucky, we won't be hissed at, and we'll make it up to you soon. So thank you for kind of letting me do this. And if not, then I'm a liar, and so good night to everyone. So he's looking at his father very intensely when he says this. It's like a message to his father. And his suicide scene was the imagery there was very powerful to me. First of all, he puts that crown of thorns, which I couldn't help but associate with, of course, the sacrifice of Jesus. The crown of thorns, and he realizes that he has to sacrifice his true self. And then he goes down the stairs, and I don't know if you noticed, but he turns into a shadow. When he walks down those stairs, you can only see the outline of his body, and everything is just black. So he walks down these stairs, and he turns into a shadow. And what I think drove him to commit suicide is the fact that he experienced real human connection with Keating, especially in that open and honest conversation that they had, where he was heard and he was given empathy and understanding. And he even says, I can't talk to my father this way, so he finally realizes that there are two types of conversations, one real and one that is fake. And then if you notice, when he kind of calms down, it's in the last conversation with his father, when he says, so tell me, what do you feel, because he says, I have to tell you how I feel, he says to his father. And his father is like really angry. What do you feel, and then he just calms down and he realizes this is never going to happen and says nothing, it's pointless. So this shows me what is real, which is the danger of introducing the concept of true self and true expression and self-knowledge while somebody is still stuck in a toxic environment. That is very dangerous, because when you get into self-knowledge and when you get into expressing your true self, you have to remove yourself from a toxic environment. Otherwise, this ends up being suicidal.
Yeah, it certainly can do. Yeah, I'm certainly in a child situation like Neil was in. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a way of how do you cope with a toxic environment, because you have to be in it.
I wanted to say about the suicide scene, which is, I thought it was interesting that when the camera's showing the father asleep, we don't actually hear the gun go off. And I was going to ask, and I still am asking, if anyone has an idea of why, from a purely technical reason, cinematography reason, why they didn't use the sound of a gun going off. They just cut to the father waking up, which I think is a little jarring because you're expecting it. But I'm wondering if maybe the reason is because it wasn't the gun that killed the father or wasn't the gun that killed Neil as much as the father, and so they, instead of having a gun go off, they just show the father's face as we know it happened.
Yeah, you're right. It was a jarring moment, right? Because you were expecting a gun, for him to wake up to a gun shot, but he didn't. Well, you certainly didn't hear the gun shot.
Yeah,
but,
we know he heard it because it woke him up, but it must have been. I mean, it makes sense if it was down the stairs and in a different room where the door's almost shut, that you would hear it, but it could be a noise that may not wake you up. But he hears it, and it's just an odd sound to him. But that they didn't actually have the sound go off, I thought was really interesting. I didn't know if maybe they just did it to be different, because so many, it's used very much to build suspense in films. You're waiting for a suicide, so you wait for the gunshot to go off. But then in this scene, it doesn't go off, but it still happened. The gunshot was still heard, but we don't get to hear it. And actually, another way to look at it is maybe you could say because Neil didn't hear it either. By the time his brain would have processed the sound, it was too late already. He didn't hear the sound either.
You know what's interesting, Nathan, when you were talking about it, the gunshot only went off in his father's. This is the film. I would think, or the way that they're trying to portray that, is it only goes off. The only thing that his father ever heard of his son was that gunshot.
Yeah, that's the only time we see him really, I guess you could say, connect with his son, is when he's kind of losing it, cradling him.
Yeah, but even when we don't hear the gunshot, but he does, let's say, it's the only time he actually hears in a sense, listens or hears his son. You know. I mean, it's a sort of perhaps a little bit sort of esoteric in that sense, but I mean, but you know, it's kind of poignant that we don't hear it, but he does, and he doesn't hear his son at all throughout the whole movie. He's talking down to him. He's constantly only conscious of his own feelings. What's my son? How is my son going to achieve greatness and stuff? And not listening to anything that his son. That's why his son in the last argument they had, where he just says, "Oh, nothing," because he knows that whatever he says is not going to be listened to. And it's sort of interesting. That was the first thought that came to my mind thinking through that he was the one to hear that gunshot and nobody else heard it.
There's a line from a song, I'm sure a lot of you may have heard it, from the band POD called Youth of the Nation, where he says he put an end to his, it's hard, it's kind of hard when you ain't got no friends. He put his life to an end. They might remember him then. You cross the line and there's no turning back. Told the world how he felt with the sound of a gat meaning kind of meaning a gun.
Yeah.
It was the only way he could express to his father how he felt, which is, you know, I feel like I can't live life the way I want to, and tonight I lived it the only way I wanted to, and since I can't live it like this anymore, I might as well, you know, cut it short.
Yeah, it was the only for him in that situation. It was the only thing that he was in control of, his life. You know.
Yes.
Because everything else was, you know, not his control.
And that goes back to the truth statement I was saying before, which is that in that situation, he really, you know, he has to either wait to escape, and I don't think that was drilled into him enough. I think if he'd had more people drilling into him, you know, you just have to make it through a couple more years.
Yeah.
And
well, he had a 10-year sentence ahead of him, didn't he, with military school?
Well, but
it wasn't technically, but
I don't know how that works. Like, if he was, let's say, he was supposed to be 16, I don't know how that works with military school. I mean, is it his father can force him to sign papers that put him in military school, or is when he says military school and then he responds with that's 10 years? Did he mean the 10 years of 2 years of military school and then 4 years of college and another 4 years to become a doctor?
I'm not sure, but 10 years was mentioned. But one thing I would say is when you're like 15 or whatever, and you know, I mean, I remember being 14 and feeling like in prison in a school, and 2 years away, even though I knew even though technically I knew in my head I could leave school at 16, I was like that was kind of eons away for me. And so the idea that I needed my parents or I was dependent on my parents or something, perhaps I think that was more what was going through his mind, perhaps. I mean, it's a sort of, yeah, I mean, we can all step back as adults and say, oh, you know, it's not, you don't have to be in that situation. But I think from a child's perspective or a teenager's perspective, it can seem like an endless.
Yeah, because he doesn't know. He hasn't experienced life past school or past moving out of his parents' house.
Sure.
He just literally has no concept of it.
Yeah.
And that's a society where, in our society, at least to some degree, if you say my parents were crap and so I don't talk to them, there is a little bit of sympathy. But back then, it's obvious that there's this sort of, you know, so much of your own personal prestige that you get just comes from who you're kin to.
Right.
If that makes sense. Because there's a lot of comparisons. People throughout the film are compared to their brothers and their fathers, etc.
Yeah, constantly. Yeah, you're right.
Oh yeah. I mean, even when like Knox Overstreet goes to dinner, there's that exchange. You know, like father, like son. The guy that is receiving him, I don't know his name, the name of the character. He says, "Oh, like father, like son," and then he goes on and he says, "We know where you're headed, boy," you know. And then he also says, like, he's the spitting image of his father, you know, and also Todd Anderson being compared to his brother, you know, he has to fill his shoes, his brother valedictorian, and that's how he's introduced as a character. So it's this projection of the parents on children, of who they want the children to become, with complete disregard of who these children actually are. And going back to the gunshot, I think I love what you guys said, and I didn't think about it that way, about the camera zooming in on his father instead of hearing the gunshot. But one thing that I thought is that we don't hear the gunshot because Neil is already dead. I mean, he didn't kill himself then. And if we go back to the poem that opens the meetings of the Dead Poets Society, it goes, it mentions this. I mean, Neil went to the woods because he wanted to live deliberately. Neil went to the woods because he wanted to live deep and suck all the marrow out of life. But then only when I had come to die, discovered that I had not lived. Right. So only when he comes to die, he discovers, and that's why he kills himself, because he has not really lived. He tried, and there's no way he can keep living. So he's dead, pretty much. And his father just, that's the signal that he sends his father that, hey, you killed me, you know. So his father just awakens to this reality.
Yeah, so it's almost, because you and that's interesting, because it's almost like, like there was no sound. So what was going on in that moment where he wakes up? Like, it's almost like a sort of, dare I say it, this kind of sixth sense that people have, you know, where they kind of, where he kind of wakes up to that moment. Yeah.
That's the thing I really love about film, is the way that you can do something so simple as not having a gunshot, or having a gunshot, or the smallest detail is enough. You know, you could have a conversation about why they did or did not have the sound of the gunshot, and it can take, you know, an entire hour just to kind of really think of what happened.
Yeah.
I think I will say, since this is the beginning of the FDR Film Club, is something that, and I'll if I can participate as much as I can, because I was around a lot of film students and broadcast students in college. I'll try to bring as much as I can as far as the actual technical aspects of film, the things that might get overlooked. I think it's something that should be talked about, as not just the actual story itself, but as a medium of film, is the way different, you know, the way a certain shot is done. Probably the biggest shot, I think, in the whole film, I would say it is the biggest shot in the whole film, is when Todd kind of breaks open a little bit in the middle and has his poem that he recites, and the camera is there. I think they're rotating in one direction. They're kind of spinning in one direction, because he's kind of getting Todd off balance, trying to get him to not rely on his external senses, and the camera is spinning the other direction. Right. And then it kind of, once it kind of slows down, the camera slows down and just shows Todd. It's like that's when he's finally grabbed that part of him that's poetic, and he starts, you know, throwing out this wonderful verse that starts to, without even trying, starts to rhyme and such.
Yeah, that's a great scene. Pim mentioned that. It's a very good scene. I think that's probably one of my favorite scene in the whole.
It definitely evoked the most emotion, and like, I've seen the movie a lot of times, but that scene, when I watched it last night, that was the scene that evoked the most emotion. And I think it's because of the ability for someone to express himself, and something beautiful comes out. It's not that I don't know how to put it. I think almost anyone can express something beautifully. It just has to be done with as few barriers, mental barriers, emotional barriers as possible, and something good will come out.
Yeah, good scene. And great movie. I mean, I'm really pleased. I watched it again. I watched it 3 times, actually. just to make sure I can do it as much as I did off by heart. But great film. I'm going to give it one more last go. If Adi has more to say, I'm sure maybe she does. But if not,
I want to say something.
sure.
What I found very interesting was the scene after Neil's talk with his father about the military school. His mother was obviously very scared and didn't know what to do in this situation, and she was like, well, she was just standing next to Neil's dad, and then came after the talk to like try to comfort Neil. And it makes you think, well, like, what would have happened if the mother had more courage? If she had the courage to at least comfort, like, talk to Neil honestly after the argument with his dad, like, what would have happened? Or what would have happened if she would have stood up for Neil during like the military school talk?
Yeah, I think that whole mother scene was basically her just trying to take herself out of her, trying to sort of divorce herself from her husband's view, but not entirely. It was a real, but I think it was just a placation on her part. It was nothing more. This sort of this doe-eyed kind of looking forlorn, kind of lost, and it was kind of pathetic, really.
Well, the mother is an enabler.
Yeah.
She's passive, but she still enables the father to do whatever he wants. And in fact, in one of the opening scenes, when his father tells him that he has to focus on school, he mentions, "You do know how much this means to your mother, you know." So that's kind of putting pressure on him, and she's pretty much non-existent. She's self-erased completely, and he uses the image of this, the mother image, to put pressure on his son, because it actually means a lot to him. We see that in the end of the movie, that his mother is pretty much just there as a witness, as a enabler, but his father uses the love, or quote love, that Neil has for his mother to put pressure on him, and he's manipulating. And also, one thing I wanted to address is the scene where his father finds out about the play, and he accuses Neil. He says, "You made a liar out of me, Neil." And I found that just terrible, because what he does, he's accusing his son of making a liar out of him, but what he's actually asking his son is to lie to himself at the same time. So this double standard, like, I can't lie to my neighbor just by mistake, but you have to lie to yourself about who you are, the biggest lie of all.
Yeah, it's funny, you reminded me, that was actually in my notes, that scene. You're quite right. That was a terribly brutal, like, it wasn't, as you say, it wasn't that he caused, it wasn't that Neil caused him to lie. It was that he caused himself to lie, of course, or he caused his own son to lie for him. So it's entirely of his own volition. Yeah, I mean, pretty hateful sort of. He's left in a catch-22 situation. I either lie to you and get away with it, or I tell you the truth and I don't get to do what I want to do.
Earlier in the hangout, you said that one of the important themes of the movie is the whole carpe diem, seize the day thing. But I think a more important theme is the whole false self and refusal of one's identity. Like, Neil would have lived if he had the courage to stand up against the people who were trying to refuse his identity. And I think, like, the people who kill themselves of that, they're avoiding the fact that they have to make a decision. Either they refuse their own identity and they have to live for the rest of their lives in the pain of knowing that they're living in their fake selves, or they have to have the courage to face the people who are oppressing them and oppressing their identity, or Neil's love for acting. And yeah, I'm just saying that Neil, by killing himself, he's avoiding the responsibility of having to make a choice between having to have courage or living through pain.
Yeah, he never seems to really blame, unless I'm, and please correct me if I'm wrong, he never seems to actually say to anyone, my father's being a jerk. He almost seems to be like, it's my fault because I'm not good enough at getting my father to understand. I can't do that. There's something that prevents me from doing that. It's my fault.
Yeah.
Although I would, I'm sorry.
No, go for it, Dal.
I would say that he did stand up to him, and it did take a lot of courage for him to be in the play anyway. And then what he got as a result for standing up is like a life sentence, maybe even a death threat, considering he's going to be sent to the military. So that was the result of him having courage that one time.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was him. In his mind, was he standing up to his father, or was he just trying really, really hard to get him to understand instead of standing up to him? Does that make sense? Like, he never says,
well, I kind of feel like
I
it's
do what
one
I
and
want
the
to do.
same. I mean, even just just saying anything that he knows his father won't like is extremely risky, because I would say, because he's never been able to do that. So even just at the end of the play, when he's looking at him, when he says those words, I feel like that in itself would be extremely risky if you've always been abused and never been able to express yourself.
But he didn't really actually ever stand up to his father particularly. I mean, that is true. But I think you could obviously say, you could argue, of course, that he was standing up to him, but he was basically lying. I mean, I say he was lying. He just wasn't telling his father what he was doing. That was even true of the he was part of the newspaper group, I think, or the student newspaper stuff, and he hadn't told his father about that, but his father had found out and said, "Oh, you must stop doing that," etc. So he did seem to keep a lot from his father, which doesn't surprise me, of course.
This reminds me very much of, I just a few months ago finished a book about World War II, and the advisors to the Emperor of Japan. In that culture at the time, it was basically, you always obeyed the emperor, and you didn't disobey the emperor unless you felt like the emperor was somehow mistaken or misled or something like that, and then it was okay. And so to actually take the emperor hostage, which is sort of what happened for a day or two right before the official Japanese surrender, the people who did that, they still, I don't know a better word to use, so I'll just say love. They still loved, they had that love for the emperor. The emperor was a god to them, but they could still, in a sense, betray him, not because they were saying, the emperor is bad and he's wrong. It was just sort of, well, he's misled. He's not understanding it right now. And a lot of the time, if the emperor disagreed with them, but they felt they were right, they would blame themselves for not being able to express it correctly to the emperor. It's sort of the emperor, and in this situation, the father figure, he's right, and it's my fault that I just haven't really expressed myself enough. He never specifically states that his dad is wrong. He just says he doesn't understand me. He just doesn't understand me.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we've had almost a good 2 hours long, which I think is pretty cool, and for the first call, and I think it's been a great call, and I really enjoyed the feedback and the insight from people. It's for all the last couple of weeks, putting my own thoughts in this, I get like I've had like about 10 different thoughts from people today. It's really interesting.
Can I say one last thing?
I'm sure, go for it.
His father, when he said that, Neil, you're missing opportunities that I didn't ever have in my life.
Right.
Well, I think like his father is completely irrational. Like it doesn't make sense about to say that. It isn't about Neil missing opportunities, because even when he was going to the play, he still had straight A's at school. He still was doing great in school. So it wasn't about him missing opportunities. I think it was just more about his dad wanting to control his son and having like no respect for his identity.
Yeah, I think that reflects in the school, right? It's a kind of the school was about conformity. His father was about conformity, and so kind of those two, that conformity thing was the melding, was the point, I think, in his relationship with his father. He couldn't do anything. Neil could do nothing. He could get straight A's, everything else, call him yes sir, and all that kind of stuff, and he still wasn't allowed to do the stuff that he wanted to do. It didn't make any difference.
That makes me. It reminds me. The one more point I was going to say was that we kind of see throughout the movie. We see Todd as being almost the most affected by bad parenting because he's so nervous and shaking all the time. And then in the end, in a way, we find out that it's actually Neil, because he actually is driven to suicide, and it's like like was said before, it's because he's created that sort of false self. Even when he's happy and happy-go-lucky around other people, he's still not being himself, because when he's cheerful about being in the play, certainly on the inside he's scared to death of how the issue could be with his father. And I think Neil has this mask he's wearing of when he's not around his father, he wears this mask of I'm happy and I'm outgoing and I drive people to do this and do that, and I grab life. And this ties back to Freedomain Radio, which is, a lot of the time grabbing life means looking at your really personal life, which usually involves your parents, and saying something, saying what needs to be said. And he never does that throughout he almost does in the scene in his dad's study room. He almost does, and then he stops himself short. And so we almost see he's the one who's actually worse off than Todd, because Todd hasn't created a false self. Todd presents himself throughout the whole movie more honestly than Neil does, because he is afraid. He's always afraid, and he looks afraid, and he expresses his fear. But Neil doesn't do that. He kind of represses it and pushes it aside to the point of it killing him.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Yes, there is definitely a dichotomy, like the idea that you're saying between Todd and him. Yeah, definitely Neil was the most vulnerable one. Sorry, did you want to say something,
Yeah. Just to clarify the point I made earlier about having to choose between having the courage and going through the pain or dying, I'm not meaning, what I meant was, sorry, I'm not saying Neil was a coward or anything. I mean, he was trapped in a corner, and it was an extremely difficult position for him. And I think a lot of people say that people who kill themselves are cowards, but I think that's kind of bullshit, because they don't empathize with how horrible the situation is Neil was, or whoever other person who killed themselves were. So I'm just saying, even if you pick the third option, I don't mean you're a coward. Sure. I'm just saying that you didn't have the courage to stand up or didn't want to face the pain.
No, he certainly wasn't a coward. It was the sentence that was given him, or it was it was the experience that he was having, of course. Okay, so I think we've kind of draw it to an end. But I really appreciate you guys joining. As I say, I found it very, very interesting. I've got 2 films that I'd like to potentially hang out to you guys. They're more recent movies, by the way, so we're not going to be doing anything too old this time. But I've got 2 movies. I've got The Giver and Gravity. And I'd be really curious which one you'd like to review next. I'm probably thinking Gravity, because partly Gravity is available in Europe. I don't know if The Giver is available in Europe at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's in the cinemas, but it's not available, I think, on DVD or anything.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I might go for Gravity, but if there's a real passion for The Giver, I know I have a few people at FDR that are really keen on reviewing that movie, but Gravity is a really good one. I will tell you, it's a really, really interesting movie. I watched it last Christmas. But just let me know, and if you have any ideas, any thoughts about movies that you'd like to review, then yeah, just in the Google Plus group, just make your ideas known. So. But anyway, and also, any feedback you can give me on the call and how you've experienced it and all that, I'd really love to hear your feedback on that. So so do let me know. But other than that, I think I will end the broadcast now. You can, guys, carry on talking if you want. I'm just going to end the broadcast. So.
Thank you.